We are back. You are in the jungle. I'm Matt Edwards. Thanks for tuning in. After a year and change hiatus from the show, I'm bringing it back. I found myself laying in bed probably a month or two ago wondering between Andre Yoshevich, Chase Brown, and Miles Murphy, which of the three rookies from last year would benefit the Bengals most in making it back to the Super Bowl. And I laid there in bed at like 6 a.m. and thought about this for probably 20 minutes and kind of debated it with myself. And it was at that point that I realized I needed to bring this thing back. So it's good to do it. Been thinking about it for a while. Had some good success with it during that early run during the Super Bowl and then the subsequent run up to the AFC Championship. That's another thing. Both years I've done this podcast, it's ended with the Bengals in the AFC Championship. So I kind of have to play my part here as well and help this team get back to where they belong and try to finally get that Lombardi trophy in Cincinnati. I'm doing my part, doing what I can. This is coming out on August 8th. Today's the 7th. I'm recording on the 7th. That's how these things work sometime. So we're about 48 hours and change away from the Bengals' first preseason game against Tampa Bay. We're going to get into that, what to watch for in that preseason game, as well as I do want to put some things into perspective as we enter already year 5. This is year 5 of the Joe Burrow era. These good times, they go by quick, right? Time flies when you're having fun. But I want to start with Ja'Marr Chase, not currently participating in training camp, apparently because of the contract issue. I don't know what else it would be. That's the speculation. No one's really came out and exactly said that, but we all know what it is. Let's start there with Ja'Marr. And let's start with the fact that Ja'Marr is there. Jamar's being a total pro about this, right? He could have taken several different avenues. He's still at camp every day. All indications are he's smiling, he's hanging out, he's having a good time being a good teammate, just not doing any of the physical stuff. Doesn't want to get hurt as he tries to lock up one of those deals where he's making $30 million or whatever a year. Whatever it is at the latest minute, we're going to find out when maybe Brandon Ayuk gets traded before this is released, what the new big number is, although I don't think he gets as much as Justin Jefferson. But we'll see. Guys are getting paid left and right all over the place, and Ja'Marr is certainly as worthy of anyone as getting paid. He has shown in his first 3 seasons in the league that he is one of those guys who should get $30 million a year. And by the way, when people talk about, I saw too, like people were asking Joe Burrow, and they should, like, how much time do you and Ja'Marr need together? And he said a few practices. Ja'Marr Chase, if you're a fan out there and you're worried about it, he took an entire year off at LSU, comes back, gets drafted, and what's he do in year 1 in Cincinnati? Oh, he just sets the franchise receiving record for yardage. A franchise that's recently had Chad Johnson and A.J. Green. They've had some good guys there. So I think Jamar's going to be fine missing a little bit of training camp as he tries to get paid. And number 2, second thing I want to bring up on this topic, Mike Brown's comments a few weeks ago kind of got blown out of context, I think would be a fair way to put it. Particularly with the national reporters, the local media has always did a great job with it. They kind of know what they're talking about because they're with the team day in and day out. But Mike Brown's comments were kind of framed as, well, we didn't sign him in the offseason, so I guess we'll wait until next year to get Jamar's long-term deal done. Do we not remember last year? Do we not remember last year on literally opening night of the 2023 season, Chiefs-Lions, 10 minutes before kickoff, it gets announced that Joe Burrow's got a deal done. Do the Bengals want to negotiate now that training camp started? Probably not, but a lot of guys don't want to drop $250 on dinner on a random Thursday night, but if the prettiest girl they've ever seen wants to do that, then they're going to do it. You make exceptions for exceptional people, and I don't think this is going to be any different. I have to imagine that in the Cincinnati front office, inside of Paycor Stadium, I'd be stunned if they're not crunching numbers, having conversations, figuring out a way to get this deal with Ja'Marr done before training camp, if it works. I don't know. I'm not the salary cap expert guy, but you have to imagine they're trying to do that. They make exceptions for exceptional people, and Ja'Marr Chase is certainly that. So we'll see. Assuming Jamar's sitting out because he wants a new contract and there's really no other reason. It's kind of, everyone knows it. He's not necessarily trying to hide it. He's just not talked. Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow have both kind of alluded to the fact that Ja'Marr is taking care of Ja'Marr, and they're perfectly fine with that. All things are fine in Bengeldom with Ja'Marr Chase sitting out. And I don't know if it'll get done. No one really knows it'll get done. But the idea that the front office isn't having these discussions just because training camp started, a little bit ridiculous. So, and Mike Brown said it, man, after Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase is probably the next guy on this roster you have to have. So that's why this has been, probably blown up a little more than I have. He's 1A, 1B in the league as far as receivers go. Maybe 3, 4, 5, depending on who you ask. If you ask someone in Dallas, Minnesota, those type of places, they can argue all they want. What we know is there's a top tier of receivers and Jamar Chase is in it, no doubt about that. So I mentioned right there, Zach Taylor's cool with this, Joe Burrow's cool with this. And those are the two guys that Jamar needs to kind of say, yeah, he's fine, do what you want. I cannot help but wonder, and this is purely just me thinking out loud, as is pretty much the reason I brought this podcast back, so I could think out loud. If the Bengals do break the bank for Jamar Chase, and at some point they will, whether it's this year or next, but if they do it this year, does it make things a little bit awkward with T. Higgins? Like, we all know that was the drama during the offseason, right? T. Higgins wanted a new deal, allegedly requested a trade. T didn't act like someone who was requesting a trade, but he wanted the money, and as he should. You can't blame him there. He eventually signs his franchise tag. He's going to get almost $22 million this year. But after bartering for the deal all offseason, do things become a little bit awkward if T wants that deal and with 2 years left, Jamar gets a deal? There's no one in their right mind. As much as we all love T. Higgins, we all know who the number one guy is. It's Jamar. By the way, I think franchising Higgins, the right move. He's been banged up on occasion. I love T. Higgins. You love T. Higgins. We all love T. Higgins. But with the franchise tag, the Bengals get him back for a year at $22 million and gives them time to decide, okay, do we have the next number 2 on the roster right now? Is that going to be Jermaine Burton? Is that going to be Yoshi? We'll get into those guys soon. But the franchise tag, absolutely the right move for the Bengals. They can figure out in the meantime, with T still on the roster, if his replacement is already there or what they want to do when it comes to that. But if Jamar gets paid, and it would be one of, if not the richest contracts in NFL history, as far as receivers goes, does that create just a small little crack, just a small, tiny crack, nothing major, in that relationship we know that T and Jamar have? They're good friends. Them, along with Tyler Boyd, who's now in Tennessee, 3 amigos, man, absolutely love each other. And I don't think T's the type to ever come out and say he's frustrated, but internally, wouldn't it kind of be hard not to be if you've been as excellent as T. Higgins has been? And I don't think you could reasonably say you should get paid the same as Jamar, but when you're that type of competitor, it's the only mindset to have. So that's one of those things that I got to wonder too. Does the front office have that in the back of their mind, right? Like, T is a pro, he's an absolute gentleman, but if Jamar gets paid, does T sit there like, what the heck, Is that what's going on? Is that what's going on? I'm not good enough to get locked up long term, but my running mate here is. I don't know. Pure speculation. But you have to think the front office has considered that as well. Only time will tell. The Bengals have a window here, man, and you don't get much better than 1 Jamar Chase, 2 T. Higgins. So anything that would cause the boat not to be on smooth waters, you try to avoid, but you obviously have to weigh things there. Just an interesting development to watch. It's very rare, I feel like. Maybe we saw this a little bit with Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald, where like you have 2 legit star top 10, top 15 guys who could be given a new contract. So a unique situation. It's not a bad situation to have. I mean, there's a ton of teams that would love to have the option to pay either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins big money, and the Bengals fortunate to be in that situation. That said, not always the easiest waters to navigate. Okay, so preseason game 1, it's back. We're back already. Tampa Bay coming to Cincinnati on Saturday night. We talk about receivers. I looked into this. Just with Jamar and T, the Bengals are in great shape. You put anyone at number 3, any receiver in the league at number 3, take the worst receiver in the NFL, make him the Bengals' third receiver, and with Jamar, T, and whoever that number 3 guy is, you could put me in there. the Bengals are still a top 10 receiving core in the league. They just have two legit number one receivers, which you don't see that often. That said, Tyler Boyd is now in Tennessee. We know last year Tyler Boyd wasn't the same guy he's been, but I was kind of surprised to see he still had 62 catches, 667 yards, and a pair of touchdowns last year. Should have had a third one. They would have beat Houston. It's a whole nother story. We need to forget about it. It's in the past. We'll move on. But 667 yards, nothing to sneeze at for Tyler Boyd. That is, by the way, 25 more catches and 11 more yards than T. Higgins had last year. Now, of course, T. Higgins played 5 fewer games, but kind of worth noting, right? I didn't realize that Tyler Boyd had after Jamar, he was a number 2 guy, and we kind of, toward the end of the year, as much as we all love Tyler Boyd, kind of said like, all right, his better days are behind him, and they probably are. He's probably not going to have another 1,000-yard season, but I think there's more to replace there than we realize. In Joe Burrow's first 4 years with the Bengals, Tyler Boyd, I did the math here, about as good as math as I can do, addition and division, he averaged 775 yards a season on 68 receptions. Those are the averages during Boyd's 4 years in which Joe Burrow was the starting quarterback for the Bengals. That's a lot to replace. 775 yards, 68 catches a year. The good news for the Bengals is they've got a lot of options here. I mentioned put anyone at the 3, and they still have a top 10 duo in the league, or a top 10 core in the league. Like, take your pick here. I mean, Trenton Irwin, he's the guy currently sitting at number 1 on the depth chart here for that Tyler Boyd number 3 spot. The Bengals, by the way, have done an excellent job with him. Undrafted guy who came over after being cut from Miami. He gets on the practice squad, and now he's like, Joe Burrow absolutely trusts him. But is Trenton Irwin the guy? He's currently there on that depth chart that came out the other day. We know the depth chart isn't necessarily that important. They give the nods to the veterans. Things can change. It's whatever. But he's a guy who's developed a relationship with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow trusts him. Right now, he's a pretty dependable number 3. So is it Trenton Irwin? He had a little over 300 yards last year. Andrei Yoshevich, a.k.a. Yoshi, who's I look at his name time and time again, and I don't ever think it'll just click with me to spell that. I can spell Hushmanzada on command. I can do them all, but something about Yoshevich I just can't get down. He's another guy you have to give the Bengals kudos for. To be a 6th-round rookie and catch 4 touchdown passes. Think about that. 6th-round rookie and caught more touchdown passes than Tyler Boyd. He was good, man. He really came on down the stretch with Jake Browning. He's been the guy lined up early and often in the slot, according to reports coming out of training camp. And right now, if you had to guess or bet, if it's me, I would say he's probably got the best shot at being the number 3 guy behind Jamar and T. After that, though, is a guy that probably a year ago I think we all thought was going to be the heir apparent to Tyler Boyd, and that's Charlie Jones. They drafted him in the 4th round out of Purdue in 2023, so 2 rounds ahead of Yoshi, and he was awesome returning punts, returned one for a touchdown, then he hurts the thumb, misses a great chunk of the season with that. But is he the guy? He said he's worked on his speed in the offseason. Is he the guy who comes out and becomes what they thought what they thought he was going to be coming out of Purdue? And then there's the wild card, right? The 3rd-round pick this year. Led the Alabama Crimson Tide in receiving yards each of the last 2 seasons. Jermaine Burton out of Alabama. 1st-round talent. This is what everyone says. 1st-round talent, but some character issues. He was a 3rd-round pick, 80th overall. The Bengals take him. He's led Alabama in receiving yards 2 consecutive years, 2022 and 2023. And they've had some dudes there. I looked it up earlier. He is their first receiver to lead them in receiving yards and not go, eventually, in the 1st round since 2016. I mean, that's a hell of a run for Nick Saban and company. Yeah, I mean, the knock on him, not cool. He smacked a woman in the face after the Crimson Tide lost to Tennessee in Knoxville. The fans rushed the field. You can watch the video. There's never any way to excuse any man hitting any woman. But he slaps her in the face, kind of a clothesline type deal. The video's not great. At any rate, It's a big reason he fell in the draft, and kind of apparently just a pain in the butt sometimes. So he's a guy who we'll find out. First-round talent. Could he potentially not only be the replacement at 2, but if T goes next year, is he, or not the replacement at 3, but at 2 as well? So he's got a lot of potential. So between those 4 guys right there, like, we know Burrow trusts Trenton Irwin. He's probably got the inside track early on. He's a veteran. He's been here. He's worked with Burrow. Yoshi was great last year. It seems like the coaches right now maybe prefer him to be the guy of the future, despite what that depth chart says. He made the most of his situation last year. So, and Jermaine Burton just kind of out there along with Charlie Jones. Those are 2 guys. I mean, right here is 6. If the Bengals are going to keep 6 receivers, those are it. They'll probably keep a 7th. But I mean, it doesn't get much better. You can't have much better options than what the Bengals do without going out and paying someone some good money. So this is another reason, man, this team drafts and develops wide receivers so well. And that's a reason that maybe they do end up able to pay both Jamar and T. We'll find out. But all of those guys, Trenton Irwin's never going to cost you a ton of money as much as he fits in well in Cincinnati. It's very unlikely that he goes somewhere and gets one of those, let's say 3-year, $20 million deals. And even if he does, that means that he's had an absolutely couple baller seasons in Cincinnati, so it's worth it. And then Yoshi, Charlie Jones, and Jermaine Burton all on rookie deals. So again, that window's there. That window's right there, and it'll stay open as long as they continue to get guys like that who can contribute. But again, filling that Tyler Boyd role, it's kind of like the main thing I'm curious to see early in the preseason. As much as there's not going to be an issue, I don't think. One of those 4 guys will step up. I don't know that they'll have close to 700 yards. I don't know that they'll average almost 800 yards over the next 4 seasons. But one of those 4 guys, one would think, would be able to, maybe go for 400, 500, maybe get to 600. And it's very possible it happens by committee as well. Maybe it's Mike Gesicki who does that. We'll find out there, the tight end who came over after a few years in the AFC East. So there's other things I'm excited to see. We'll go through each of them each week and talk about that. I'll tell you what's on my mind. I'll just say right out of the gate, Chris Jenkins, man, I love that pick, despite the fact he's a Michigan guy, and I am not a Michigan guy. He just seems like absolute pro, kind of a guy who reminds me a little bit of B.J. Hill, and you could always use more B.J. Hills. So we'll see how that goes. And, of course, Amarius Mims, we're all excited to see what he can be. And someone's got to replace Jonah Williams as he moves on to Arizona. And that offensive line, always, always, always the thing we're watching as Bengals fans, because you got to keep number 9 up and active. So, yeah, that'll be that. We'll look more at the offensive line as time goes on. We know the starting 5 in Week 1 won't be the same as the starting 5 in Week 18. It just never works that way. So we've got to make sure that those 6, 7, 8, 9 guys can step in and play meaningful snaps on the offensive line. 9 might be pushing a little bit. 9 might be asking for a little bit much. So, yeah, that'll be fun. It'll be nice to see Joe Burrow back out there. They kind of said they just want him to go through the motions. Maybe he comes in for a series, throws a handful of quick passes, hands the ball off a few times, gets back into the swing of things. I mean, he's been out for a while now, and he's obviously a pro, knows what he's doing. But with the slow starts this team's had the past couple years, they know they need to come out firing on all cylinders. And Joey B, Joe Shiesty, Slim Shiesty, as we now call him, it'll be nice just to see him back out on the field. We'll get into all that. I'll release an episode probably the night of the game. That'll be the goal. It'll be a short thing, but let you know what I thought. And I'm gonna try to do 2 episodes a week and give you all my thoughts, opinions. There's so much good content out there. So if you're a Bengals fan, good time to be alive, man. When I was a kid, I remember my dad would get like Bengals Weekly maybe in the mail, Bengals Monthly. So you would get that, and then living 2.5 hours away from Cincinnati, like if ESPN was on, this was before NFL Network, if ESPN was on and they mentioned the Bengals, no DVR, nothing to record anything. This is like a sprint to the living room moment. If my dad and I were in a different room and something about the Bengals came on the TV in the late 90s, when there wasn't really a lot of reason to talk about them on the one sports network that that existed. So we're living in a great time. There's a lot of great information, a lot of great reporters, a lot of creators out there, and I'm trying to be one of them. So hope you enjoy it. I'm going to try to do this every podcast. I'm going to call this Before You Go, Here's One for the Road. As I heard the great Sturgill Simpson sing on his new album, I thought that's something I'd like to do to end every podcast, just give a little parting thought. And it's Bengals related. I'm not going to tell you about, anything else. Not trying to do that. I do that for a different podcast. But I do want to point out, as I mentioned, those late 90s teams and if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously have an interest in the Bengals. So you've seen the suffering. You've seen what this team and this franchise has been through. Just keep in mind that little things are going to go wrong. But probably about 75 to 80% of the league would take this Bengals roster, this Bengals situation, and certainly this Bengals quarterback in a heartbeat over what they have. There's a handful, maybe you know who they are. Jamar didn't say their names. I'm not going to say their name. There's a handful who wouldn't, but for the most part, we are one of the lucky fan bases to say, pretty good situation. Not going to be a lot of hoping. Needs to be execution. In years past, maybe you hope that things go well for the Bengals. You knew they had a chance to have a winning record, but then you hope they get hot at the right time. Not the case anymore. You keep Joe Burrow healthy. You keep the majority of the team healthy. That's a big thing. We've seen that, of course, in 2021 and then in 2022 when so much of the offensive line went down right as we came down the stretch. And then last year. I mean, you look at the last 3 seasons. Last year, Joe goes out. The Bengals still finish with a winning record. Year before that, things are going great. The Bengals still almost win the AFC and go back to the Super Bowl despite losing 3 offensive linemen during the final 2 months of the season. And then we all know they had probably the worst starting offensive line in Super Bowl history. So, got to stay healthy, but that's my one for the road. They're in such better position than probably about 80% of the league, if not more than that, especially when you factor in the fact that Joe Burrow is back, looking great, packed on the muscle, all that. So, all right, that's episode 1. Good to be back. It's in the jungle. Hopefully everything uploads right. If there are any errors, let me know. I'm on Twitter at Matt Edwards. Thanks for tuning in. Any feedback, subscriptions, ratings, all that stuff, as usual, is appreciated. And we'll see you back here after the preseason game 1.